Hello, good evening. Welcome to Science on Tap Minocqua. Thanks for coming. My name is Carol Warden. I work at UW Trout Lake Station. Science on Tap is an example of the Wisconsin idea, an idea conceived in 1905 that the borders of the university are the borders of the state. Our partners include Rocky Reef Brewing. Thank you very much for hosting us. The Lakeland chapter of the Wisconsin Alumni Association, UW Kemp Natural Resources Station, UW Trout Lake, Minocqua Public Library, and WXPR Radio. Science on Tap is also supported through a grant from the Brittingham Fund from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We have 3 ways to watch. One of our most popular ways is right here in the brewery with us. You can also watch on YouTube live, so if you are not able to join in person, you can go onto our website. We have a link there for the YouTube stream live, and you can ask questions through there as well. Or if you're not available the night of, you can go to our website and watch archived videos from there. Our next event is Thursday, March 7th, and we'll hear from Peter Levi discussing the Mississippi River watershed. Oh, we also want to let you know about a special event we have next Thursday. Our Science on Tap and Wisconsin Academy will host an event with artist Mary Burns. This is a personal and an in-person and virtual event that will be held at the Minocqua Public Library, and this will highlight Mary's woven works. She has tapestries depicting women and water, very impressive artwork. And this will be from 6 to 7 p.m. at the Minocqua Public Library next Thursday, January 11th, and refreshments will be served at 5:30 if you'd like to join for that. Tonight we have Bart Kortarba, did I say that right? Yes. And Amanda Schirmer from the Northwoods Wildlife Center. The Northwoods Wildlife Center is located adjacent, just across Highway 70 from Triggs, not to be confused with the Wildwood Zoo. This is a separate entity, and their mission is to provide a better future for wildlife through rescue, rehabilitation, research, and education. Amanda grew up in Plainfield, Wisconsin, and attended University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. She majored in wildlife ecology with an emphasis on research and management, and double minored in biology and captive wildlife. Amanda started working here within a year after graduating college, and she just completed her 9th summer season at the Northwoods Wildlife Center. Excellent. She's passionate about rehabilitating all wildlife, but she has many favorites. Amanda particularly likes rehabilitating white-tailed deer fawns, porcupines, turtles, corvids, and of course raptors. She is a bird fan for all you birders out there. When not working, she loves to spend time with her family, including her 2 children and wonderful husband. Amanda also has 2 dogs, 2 horses, a small flock of chickens, and a small parrot she enjoys spending time with. Bart grew up in Menasha, Wisconsin, and also attended UW-Stevens Point. He graduated in 1988 with a degree in wildlife management and biology, with an emphasis on environmental education and interpretation. During the summer of his senior year of college, he actually interned at Northwoods Wildlife Center. He and his wife, Lori, were married in 1989, and they moved to Rhinelander then. Bart continued to volunteer at Northwoods Wildlife Center and was hired as the Director of Education in 1991. They have 2 kids, 2 grandkids, and when they're not spending time with their little ones, they love to go on rock and fossil hunts. Per tradition, we have some trivia stories for Bart and Amanda, and since we have 2 speakers, you get 2 for the price of 1 tonight. So one autumn day, Amanda was taking her dogs for a walk through the woods, and the dogs went merrily on their way, chasing after things. As Amanda approached the hill, she encountered an animal that was not her dog. It was a fisher. It stood 8 to 10 feet in front of her, and they stared each other down for what felt like forever. The fisher gave a huge growl and then took off down the next hill. Both the fisher and Amanda were equally surprised and spooked by each other, but she was happy the dogs didn't see the fisher and Rochambeau. But the story didn't end there. The following spring, Amanda and the dogs returned to the same area in the woods and found evidence of the fisher's continued residence. So, your question for the night is, how did Amanda know that the fisher was a full-time resident of these woods? A, there was scat all over the trail, and the dogs did what dogs do with that type of evidence. The fisher crossed their paths again, but this time with babies. Or C, Amanda's dog took off down the woods in the woods once again, and Amanda found her rolling in a stinky corpse of a porcupine, and moments later rolling in a deceased mink. 2 tasty treats for a fisher. So, A, what is A here? Scat. B, fisher babies. Or C, rolling in dead corpses. Oh, all of the above. It is C. Lots of stinky animals on that day on that ride home. All right, a story with Bart here. Tommy, the resident Northwoods Wildlife Center hawk, who you will meet tonight, has only one wing. Bart decided to use anklets that snap on her feet when she leaves for programs that can be taken off when they come back to the center. He thought this would be a nice thing to do for the bird because permanent anklets might start annoy her over time. Once in a while, Bart would open her box and discover she had unsnapped one of those anklets, but this wasn't too big of a deal when it was only one that was off. This past summer, Bart had her at Land O'Lakes Public Library on the main street, and there's usually 70 to 80 people in attendance there. And Tommy is usually very chill in any situation, but something set her off this time, and she jumped off the glove. Any other time, Bart would get her back on the glove without any trouble, but not this time. The stars aligned and both anklets unsnapped. She was on the ground, disappeared behind the library's sign, and in a split second, Bart imagined having to chase Tommy through the parking lot around 80 people trying to get her back. But Tommy had only gone about 3 feet and jumped on a little retaining wall. She stepped right up on the glove like nothing happened when he found her way over to her. But somebody was none too happy with that hawk hanging around in their neighborhood. Who was it that flipped out when all this happened and spent the rest of the presentation letting the crowd know exactly how they felt about this hawk in their neighborhood? A, a bunch of toddlers that were playing in the yard that got scared. B, a family of robins whose protective father was not thrilled with one of their top predators in the neighborhood. Or C, a flock of chickens in the neighboring property with a very vocal hen. A, toddlers, B, robins, or C, chickens? It was the robin family, a protective father. Now, Amanda and Bart.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I'm going to start this off, and Amanda and I decided we would start by talking about raptors, but we don't have to stick with that. We can move on to other things. So I did bring along a special guest, and she is a raptor or a bird of prey. And one thing about birds of prey is they all have a nice curved beak. They use that for ripping and tearing. And I used to be able to say that all birds of prey also had powerful talons, and that's what sets them apart from other birds. You know that science is always changing. People learn new things. And in the 80s, they did some research and decided that turkey vultures, which look a lot like a bird of prey, really weren't, that they were more closely related to storks. And so that made it really easy because even if kids would guess that a turkey vulture was a bird of prey, they're not. And it's because they don't have powerful talons. Well, they've recently done more studies, and they've discovered that turkey vultures and eagles and hawks are kind of like this on the tree of life or whatever, so they are pretty closely related. So you can't say that all birds of prey have powerful talons, but most of them do. And so I thought I would pass some of those around so you can take a look at them. The one with the white on the top is from a red-tailed hawk. And the one that's got some tape on it so you don't have to see the gross bone underneath is from a great horned owl. And then I also have a skull from a red-tailed hawk and a skull from a great horned owl. I like to compare those birds because they're really the same size birds. They like the same kind of food. They live in the same type of habitat. But one is the day shift, one is the night shift. And so it's interesting to see how there are differences in their bodies. So if you look at these skulls, these are replicas, by the way, but you can see from the back of the head, tip of the beak, the skulls are about the same length, and the beaks themselves are about the same size. But if I turn it around this way, can you tell which is the owl, which is the hawk? This is the owl, this is the hawk, right? Yeah, owls have big fat eyes, so they have to have big fat skulls. So I'll pass those along. I should mention that there is something called the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Actually, I have to mention. And it says that without a permit, it's illegal to have any nest, feather, egg, or part of a migratory bird without a license. And we happen to have that to keep these things to use for educational programs. So believe it or not, if you find a blue jay feather on the ground, you're not supposed to pick it up and keep it. But I will start over here. Is it okay if I pass some of this stuff around? Yeah, okay. And it's not a door prize, so it has to end up like on the table there someplace, all right? No. And I'm sure all of you have noticed birds of prey, whether you live in the Northwoods or wherever you live. But through this, I was hoping that maybe this would give you opportunity to start to notice even more birds of prey. And so we'll start with this bird. The lights might weird her out, so we'll have to see what happens. So this is a red-tailed hawk, and she's going to poop. Look at, there we go. Nice, nice. So red-tailed hawks are very easy to identify. First of all, they're one of the largest birds of prey in Wisconsin, so the size can help you out. If you look at the shape of her body, she's got a pretty large body, a nice sized tail, but it's pretty short. If you would happen to see her with her wings open, she has, well, one wing, but normally they would have two big wide wings. She's in a family of hawks called buteos. Probably a better way to say it is buteo, but I do programs for kids a lot, and I refuse to say buteo. But so anyhow, those birds are soaring birds, basically. You can also identify her as a red-tailed hawk because she's got a pretty dark head. Her chest should be pretty light, but it's kind of tan right now. And then she has speckles on her chest. So those are field marks, things that even at a distance you can use to identify her as a red-tailed hawk. And then you can also see that she has a nice red tail. It takes a red-tailed hawk about 2 years, though, before they get a red tail. Juvenile birds, you can see the barring on her wings. That's kind of what their tail looks like. So red-tailed hawks, when I talk about birds of prey, I do programs for kids most of the time. And sometimes what I like to do is talk about the bird's superpower. And if you think about red-tailed hawks, what do you think a good superpower would be for a red-tailed hawk? Eyesight? Okay, so most birds of prey have really good eyesight. I don't think that's her superpower, though. There are other birds of prey that I think can see better than she can. And some that can see in like crazy ways. So, what's that? Good vocalist? Yeah. Do you know another way you can identify a red-tailed hawk is by their call. They have the typical sound that you think of when you think of, well, actually, for a lot of people, eagles. It's kind of the kind of call. But yeah, that's a way you can I have a recording, but I can't do that. So I think her superpower, red-tailed hawk's superpower, is adaptability. They can live almost anywhere in North America. They're found anywhere from the tree line up in Alaska and Canada through most of the United States and down into Mexico and or some parts of Central America. And if you think about all the different kinds of habitats that are in those areas, these birds can find prey in almost all of those. So very, very widespread birds of prey. These are the most numerous of the hawk-like birds that live in North America. Sad thing is it used to be the American kestrel, sparrowhawk, that was the most numerous. But they're a grassland species, and grassland species are declining. And then also another thing about birds of prey is that bigger birds of prey will eat the smaller ones. So as red-tailed hawk numbers have increased, I'll bet that they're eating some of the American kestrels too. Red-tailed hawks also make a stick nest. It's not as big as a bald eagle nest, but they make a nest of sticks, usually on like the forest edge, on an edge. So they're an edge species. Because they have those big wings, they're not really great at going into the woods. So when a bird does that, it's called a rouse, and that's a good sign. If she was really tense right now, her feathers would be clamped down. She'd be, thinking about where she's going to go. But she's already settled in a little bit, so she wanted to look really nice for you. So that's why she did that. All right. So I'm going to turn her around so you can see her again. Notice how she's kind of doing this with her head. So they have very good depth perception, and she's kind of using that to kind of figure out how far things are away from her. Did you notice the large talons that she has? Red-tailed hawks are really good at catching larger prey, so like rabbits and squirrels, chipmunks and snakes, and so those big fat talons are really good for doing that. You notice me doing this once in a while. Honestly, I'm kind of out of practice. If you look at her, how much do you think she weighs? 8 pounds? Sometimes when I do programs, kids are like 30 pounds. I wish I could hold 30 pounds like that. When I say that, then kids are like 1 pound, 2 pounds, when they look at me, but she's about 3.5 pounds. So she's a good-sized bird of prey. On a good day, a bird of prey can lift about half of its own weight, though. So take one last look at Tommy because, oh, wait, no, we're going to keep her out. Okay. So I'm going to switch things over to Amanda because she's going to talk about the medical part of it. We're sharing this, so I don't want to talk too much. Right?
Yeah, so what I was going to talk about today is back in 2016, late summer, was the first time I was the rehabber that actually admitted her to the center. Way back when, when she first came in. She actually, so I actually have known her since the day she came. So she came in, and, oh, very nice. She came in 2016, late summer. She was a fresh from the nest fledgling, so she did not look the way she did now. She was quite a bit smaller. We actually thought she was a male when she came in, hence her name Tommy, because she was a hawk from Tomahawk. Mm-hmm. So once we realized he was a she, that's why her name is spelled with an I and not a Y. So yeah, she came in 2016, was up along somebody's garage when they got up in the morning, and what we believed happened to her was she was struck by a car. They had noticed that she had some blood on her wing and that it was hanging a little bit, so they gave us a call, and luckily we had a volunteer driver that could go down to the area, picked her up, and brought her in that day. So there were some very obvious injuries upon her admission. One was the wing, and one of her eyes actually had quite a bit of blood in it. So those are probably two of the things I'll be talking with her. So she came in, and the other thing we noticed is this was probably one of the calmest red tails I had handled up to that point. So at first I suspected head trauma. It didn't take long to realize that was not the case. That was just Tommy's personality. She's very calm. So yeah. The first thing to kind of touch on was the eye. Again, Bart had mentioned that birds of prey need their eyes for depth perception. So it was a big concern that one of her eyes was filled with blood. When she first got there, she had an exam from our sponsoring vet next door at the Northwoods Wild Animal Hospital, and he could not see through the blood to the back of her eye, so we did not know how much damage was done. So we started treating her with antibiotics and steroid eye drops, and luckily over time, the blood was reabsorbed, and we were lucky that it was just a bleeding in the eye. It was not permanent damage. So Tommy is blessed today, and she has sight in both her eyes. So she is indeed fully sighted. So if she was a bird that we could have released, that would have been great news. That would have not have stopped her from going back to the wild. That's what we want to know. Eye injuries in birds are actually quite common when they experience trauma. And the big reason why that is because Bart showed you those skulls, and you saw how much of those skulls were made up of eye. With an owls particularly, it can be up to a third of their skull is actually just their eyes. So in hawks, it's a little bit less, but if you think about, they're getting an impact trauma, what is in the skull is there to take that sort of impact. And it's not much there. So what ends up absorbing that a lot of time is the eyes, which causes injury, unfortunately. Most raptors cannot be released with one eye, unfortunately. That would be a non-releasable type of injury. So there are some exceptions to the case, and by some, I mean a far few. Owls that come in as an adult and they lose an eye, sight in an eye, sometimes can pass testing and be released if they have previous experience. That is mostly because owls have great big ears and they can learn to depend on other sorts of senses. Hawks aren't so lucky that they have such developed hearing, quite as the great horned and the barred owls and things do. But it doesn't mean that every barred owl or great horn with one eye can pass. It's up to the amount of experience they have, the kind of prey they like to hunt, because even in individuals, they'll choose to hunt something over another, and things like that. So there's a very rigorous type of testing we have to go through to make sure they're able to pass that. This summer, we actually were very, very lucky. We had a broadwing hawk that came in, lost sight in one eye. We believe she may have had some vision in the other eye, but it was mostly shadows, not enough to say she had great depth perception. We were able to keep the hawk for an extra month, and she learned to hit her perch as well with one eye. So we did her prey testing, and that boy could that hawk hunt. So that one was one of the few lucky ones that we were able to release, and hopefully she's out there flying somewhere in South America today. So yeah, so unfortunately eyes are a big deal in rehab. Tommy was a lucky one. She came out all right. So unfortunately, that is something we closely watch. The other one was that wing. Also a very big deal with birds, because if their wings aren't perfect, they can't fly correctly. So with Tommy, unfortunately, she did have an elbow dislocation. Dislocations in birds are very, very hard, because the way they've evolved over time, they've given up a lot of things. So once those bones pop out of place, it is almost impossible to keep them in place. Once you can put the dislocation back in, they almost pop out right away. So unfortunately, that's not a fixable injury. So at that time, we had decided she was a very calm bird. So we did decide to wrap it, secure the wing, and to keep it straight. Of course, it was starting to heal, but the other issue is dislocations come along with arthritis. With releasing a bird that is a high risk of arthritis, when it comes to birds like Tommy, I can manage her arthritis in captivity with supplements and pain medication as needed. My wild patients, I can't do that once they're out of my hands. So I wouldn't want to release a bird that had a high risk of arthritis to be releasing it to possibly have chronic pain, not that far in the future. So that's always something we have to deal with too with wing injuries. Dislocations are something I can't fix. Bone breaks, sometimes I can. We have the option of surgical if they're the right candidate for it. And they're the right temperament for it. A very crazy wild bird that doesn't want to sit still doesn't make a great candidate. And unfortunately, birds of prey can't be told to sit and stay. So, because that would make our jobs a lot easier. For her, unfortunately, we knew that was a non-releasable injury. But then the next thing that always pops in our mind is, well, I can't save this bird to be released in the wild. Could she have a place in captivity? And she had a lot of things going for her saying that she could possibly do that. One was that temperament that continued to stay calm no matter what kind of environment she was in. Rehab can be kind of a high-stress environment for some patients. And she took it like she was taking a nap on a Sunday afternoon. I always like to tell the story of frequently I'd be, giving her treatments, pain medications early on, treating the eye. I was picking her up a lot. And oftentimes I'd be doing the care, and one of my interns would be in there cleaning her up, put her meal in there, so when she came back, she had something to eat. And oftentimes I'd put her in the cage, and that food was usually sitting in the front, and she would turn around and start eating. Birds of prey generally don't put their heads down and start eating while you're there, because they see that it's possible threat. They're taking their eyesight away from you, and if I'm perceived as a predator, they're not going to do that. Well, she didn't care. So, and the other thing was it was right in the front. So she oftentimes would bend over, and actually her tail feathers were still sticking out the door, so I couldn't close the door. So I actually would kind of grab her tail and physically turn her around while she was eating, and she didn't care. She was very calm about it. So that was a good sign, again, that I was resolving. So after that was where we decided the wing could not stay on like that because the arthritis was going to set in quite heavy. We actually opted for the amputation. By taking the wing off, we've relieved her from a lot of chronic pain because there's no arthritis if there's no joint to develop arthritis in. She was also lucky it was an elbow. We cannot amputate above the elbow. And the reason, there's a legal reason for that, but also really a humane reason because they develop arthritis very significantly when it's taken off of the shoulder, because oftentimes then they'll have to compensate for their body weight being differently, and it always ends up going into their legs. They get very bad foot and leg arthritis later in life. Plus, they have balance issues. It tends to make those kind of birds a lot more flighty, a lot more uncomfortable because they don't feel like they can get away from you. So out of just being humane, we decide not to do that to those birds. But Tommy was lucky, and she was able to be amputated. She healed up well from her surgery. Very quickly glove trained because she kind of was one of those birds that was okay with kind of training herself because she was not bothered about stepping up on your glove over time. She was young, so she was very food motivated. That always helps because when they're growing, they're very hungry. So you can convince, if she didn't want to step up, you can convince her with a snack. So, so yeah, that was basically Tommy as a patient. So there was a lot of different concerns we were dealing with her, but luckily she was able to make it through. And her young age really made her a great candidate because young birds don't always know what it meant to be truly wild. Like she didn't really know what it was to be flying around and catching her own prey and stuff like that because she never actually experienced that. So she's not missing it because she never had it, if that makes sense. Versus an adult coming in, sometimes they'll miss it. They know what it means to be wild. But so for her, she's perfectly happy being here with us. So yeah, so she's roughly 8 years old, going on 8 years old now. So.
She came in 2016. So,
Yeah.
Yep, almost 8.
Yep. But they can live into their 20s, so she's still a spring chicken.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yes, thank you very much. Just 1 second. We do have a microphone. Oh, hi. Amber has a microphone, and we would ask that you wait for her to find you. Raise your hand if you have a question. I'm sure we have tons of them, which is great. That way the online audience and the rest of the room can hear you. Thanks.
I'm curious as to what you give a bird for pain. Was Tylenol, extra strength Tylenol?
Yeah, no, we're really lucky that our vet clinic is next door, so it gives us a high access to a lot of nice pain medications. I would use something like Metacam, which you use for anti-inflammatory and some pain as well. So that is a very safe drug for birds. It's one of those things like pain medication in wildlife. There's nobody out there researching it. So a lot of it's done by people like rehabbers and wildlife veterinarians trying it and kind of seeing what's going on with that. And Metacam is a high one that we use. Gabapentin is another one we frequently go to. Anything above that, usually we're needing our veterinary assistants for it. And they're writing a prescription and we're going to the local pharmacy, or we have a compounder in town that we would get those medications from. So yeah, we have a couple different options in the house, and when we give it to them, they're not working, I would go ahead and call my vet next door, and they would prescribe me something for that bird. So yeah, we're one of the only lucky setters in the state of Wisconsin that our vet clinic is literally attached to our clinic. So we have veterinary access pretty close to them. So yeah, a lot of the medication we're giving is oral. Luckily, we do have injectable options as well. When some birds, you need the medicine quicker. Oftentimes giving it by injectable is an easy, quick way to give it to them. Because sometimes they're not cooperative. We're talking about a bird of prey. I can, get that one to take it. But if you're talking about giving a coyote an oral medication, sometimes that's not something we want to do on a daily basis. So if I can give it in a snack, great. But if you won't eat for me, then, I can give it by injectable as well. Does that answer your question? Awesome.
Initially, you thought that Tommy was a male, but then decided that she was a female. Was it her coloring or how fast she changed her size, or does a bird go through puberty?
Yeah. Yeah, so birds of prey have something called reverse sexual dimorphism, which is a big word, but is basically the males are smaller than the females. So he came in small, we go by weight. Yes, and the weight kept just going up and up and up, and she wasn't heavy. So it was a healthy weight, and it got bigger. And then, yeah, her body size physically got larger and outgrew the size of what a typical male would be. So then that's where we found out he was a she. You can tell by a blood test as well. A lot of times we don't have to with our raptors because, again, that sexual dimorphism usually can cue us in and what it is. Yeah, so that's where it also, too, realizing how incredibly young she probably was, it's fresh out of the nest, because the fact that she was still actively growing as well.
So Tommy is a buteo, like I said, and there are two other families of groups of hawks. One is the falcon, and one are the accipiters. And accipiters are birds like Cooper's hawks and northern goshawks that we see in this area. And with them, the females can be a third larger than the males. And one of my favorite stories is that when a male is courting a female, he'll bring her food, but instead of like bringing her food aggressively, he'll kind of slide up to her like, hey, how's this sound? Because she's big enough that she could beat him up if she wanted to. So that's kind of cool.
Would she lay eggs or would she need a mate for that?
The question, will she lay eggs or does she need a mate for that?
She can lay eggs. She has not. Usually it's something that is encouraged by having a mate, and she's not caged with another male. We have had other raptors on site lay eggs in the past, though.
And some of them we've had for years before they lay an egg, so it doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
All right. So if there are no other questions, I mean, if we don't have questions, so the red-tailed hawks are the most common that we'll see around here. You'll see them as you drive down the road. That's probably what you're going to see. But this time of year, if you see a red-tailed hawk-sized bird, there's a good possibility it could be a rough-legged hawk. Rough-legged hawks are hawks that breed in the tundra, and believe it or not, Wisconsin is a winter vacation for them. And so they'll show up. And I just saw one this morning on my way in from Rhinelander. And because they hunt in the tundra in the summertime, in the winter, a lot of times you'll see them by wetlands. A lot of times they'll head farther south into central Wisconsin because the grassy areas are places that they feel comfortable hunting in, but then also bogs. And you can identify them as a rough-legged hawk because, again, about the size of a red-tailed hawk, but instead of having those speckles on their belly, they have a really dark, thick band on their belly and then kind of a white collar. And sometimes it looks like their heads are white, sometimes kind of dark too, but that dark and then white is a way to identify them. And those are usually the females. Interesting thing about rough-legged hawks is that the males a lot of times are almost solid brown, unless you see them take off and they've got white and brown in their tails. But something to watch for. Another buteo that lives in our area, probably more commonly, is the broad-winged hawk. They're only about this big. A red-tailed hawk, a lot of times you'll see them near the top of a tree hunting, but the broad-winged hawks are maybe about halfway or less up the tree. They love to eat amphibians, so salamanders and frogs, so sometimes you'll see them on the edge of a wetland. But broad-winged hawks are here only in the summertime. If you hear people going up to Hawk Ridge in Duluth to see migrating birds, that's what they're really hoping to see. I mean, you can see bald eagles, golden eagles, all kinds of migrating raptors, but you can literally see thousands, tens of thousands of broad-winged hawks in a day. But again, much smaller.
Hi. When a red-tailed hawk makes its classic caw noise, what is it signaling to other hawks or anything in particular? Like, what's the signal for?
So usually it's a territorial thing. Sometimes if they're feeling kind of aggressive to each other, they'll give that call as well. Yep. It's interesting, when I do programs, a lot of times I'll play the call of a bird, because it's a great way to identify them. I'll play the call of a bird and see if kids can guess what it is. And when I play the typical red-tailed hawk call, a lot of times kids will think it's a bald eagle because in movies and commercials they play that sound so much. But if I'm in northern Wisconsin, because kids see bald eagles so often, usually they get it right. But kind of interesting.
Were you going to play the
Oh,
sound
I
today?
will, yeah. So I have an app called iBird Pro. It's a subscription app, but it's really cool because it's all there. Smartphones are fantastic. It's a great way to identify things. There's an app, a free app called Merlin, It's fantastic because it's got this feature where you can push the microphone button and it will identify birds that are around you. Just use it as a tool though, because you want to verify that what you're hearing is correct. But I've been learning so much. I hear birds and I'm like, what in the world is that? Almost always they've been red starts. I'm amazed at how common they are. But red starts are near the top of a tree. Sorry, here we go. Sounds. And I could, come on, please. Here we go. Come on. So that's kind of it. Yeah. Sorry, blew your ears out.
Yes, so related, I was curious about, you had mentioned that owls have a much better sense of sound. How do hawks use a sense of sound at all, or how does that compare?
So hawks have a pretty good sense of hearing. It's not as well developed. An interesting thing, though, there is a bird of prey called a northern harrier. They're pretty easy to identify. They have kind of long wings. The males are gray with black tips. When they soar over it, they'll fly back and forth over fields, so they're a grassland species. But at the base of their tail on the top, they've got a big white patch. Anyhow, interesting thing about them is they actually have a little facial disc, just like an owl does. So when they're flying over a field, they're looking for mice, but they can also hear them. But that facial disc is what really, that kind of this saucers around their eyes is what helps them out.
Yeah, and owls also they have very large ears. If you ever get a chance to see them, they're like almost like look like holes in the side of their head. They're huge, but they're right behind that facial disc, and they're actually lopsided. So that's also why you're seeing them called triangulating, and they're moving their head in a triangle because they're able to use those ears that are offset to exactly pinpoint where that prey item is. And there's owls that are like great gray owls that are hunting mice under the snow they can't even see. So they're hunting strictly by hearing. So yeah, those ears that are offset behind that facial disc that is kind of like a big radar. And they're able to zone in on that as well. So those are some things that the hawk is lacking. Though the hawk has good hearing, it doesn't have those extra tools.
It's not their superpower.
Yeah.
Another question, when I'm driving down a single lane wooded road and a hawk will fly across in front of me, what kind do you think it is?
So I've seen broadwing hawks do that. So if it's in the summertime, because they've got shorter wings, they can get into tight spaces. But if you see one that's kind of like doing a little bit of acrobatics at the same time, it could be a Cooper's hawk, or it could be a northern goshawk. So it kind of depends on the size. If it was red-tailed hawk size, up in this area, northern goshawk, but a Cooper's hawk, their wingspan is about this big. Cooper's hawks, accipiters in general, love to eat birds, and they're the ones, especially if you live in a residential area, they love to visit bird feeders. Because, you're feeding the birds and then you're feeding the hawks. So yeah, and they kind of do a flap, flap, glide, glide, but you'll notice that really long tail. The long tail is helping them to kind of turn, and they can open it really wide, and they can brake and steer. It's kind of cool.
In the summertime, as I'm walking down our road, I've seen several instances where there is either a dead mouse or a dead vole literally in the middle of the road, and they haven't been run over by a car. Is this a predatory bird that might have just dropped their prey and couldn't find it back, or they don't go back for it?
Wow. That's a good question.
It always could be. It could also be other types of animals, like you have your mink and stuff that hunt those as well, that may get spooked and drop it and run off. So it could be something like that. I hate to say it, but unfortunately, you always have to consider a mouse that's laying there and doesn't look injured, but has passed. I always get concerned about rodenticides. Is there somebody using rat and mouse poison around that mouse could have potentially eaten that and then gone off? Unfortunately, mice that usually eat the poison don't stay at the location of which they're eating it at. They're oftentimes branching out and dying out in the public. Yeah, so that one's really hard to tell. It could be a bird of prey, or it could be some other type of predator as well. Like I always think my weasels or.
Wow, interesting, because So, I mean, owls have really large eyes. They can see well at night. They can't see in total darkness, but some of them will use just their sensitive hearing to find it. And so, I don't know. Yeah, I wonder. They've got pretty powerful talent, so I feel like once they had it, they wouldn't let go. But wow, who knows?
You
Who
never
knows?
know.
Yeah. Wow.
Interesting.
Do eagles have any kind of migratory or micro-migratory patterns? Eagles, because it seems bald eagles.
So it used to be that most of the eagles would leave for the winter because they rely on the open water to find fish. So they would fly to places where there was open water. They would congregate there. They kind of lose their territoriality sort of thing. So they're not worrying about hanging out together. But with more roadkill deer, a lot of them will stick around because there's more reliable food. You know, they're big birds, so they need quite a bit of food to sustain themselves. So it's more of a movement thing. It isn't especially like a migration. It's a little bit different when you're thinking about birds that are up farther north because then they have to be a little more intentional about it. So like for us, red-tailed hawks will kind of stick around all year, but up in Canada, a lot of them are leaving for the winter time. So, but they don't really have that set migration though. That answer it? Okay.
Steering slightly away from birds, I know you rehab a whole lot of other animals, so I was wondering if you could speak to some, I don't know, fascinating cases you've had through time with turtles or deer or things like that.
Yes, yeah, we rehab mammals, birds, and turtles as well. I'm a big turtle fan as well. She called them dinosaurs earlier. They truly are. I've seen turtles being hit by cars and coming back from, you're thinking about shell fractures. That's like a bony growth off of them, and I've seen them come back for some very, very crazy looking fractures, putting those back together, and they come back just fine from that. So I do call them dinosaurs very frequently because they truly have this amazing healing ability to succeed. So I always, make sure to watch for your turtles. It's not turtle season yet, but it will be before we know it. So I always love my turtles. We just this last spring were able to jump back into rehabbing fawns. We have, unfortunately, weren't able to do it for a few years because white-tailed deer can catch COVID and spread COVID. So, being aware of that is always a good thing. So, unfortunately, we had to revamp our quarantine in order to take in those fawns, so we were able to hop back into that. Yeah, we do all sorts of songbirds, all sorts of, we do small carnivores like foxes and coyotes. So, yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff out there that we rehabilitate as well. So.
I have an online question here. What do you use for food for your carnivorous patients?
Oh, yes. So, yeah, animals that go ahead and they eat carnivores. We do buy a lot of frozen thawed mice, rats, quail. We also have a very large, generous community here that goes ahead and donates fish that they're hunting. We have one of our resident eagles, Hannah. She eats a lot of those fish. So we do resource the fish from our lakes as well as any sort of non-lead deer that's taken with non-lead because unfortunately a lot of meat that isn't even shot with lead ammunition will have traces of lead in it even though it's not even near the bullet site is what it's because those bullets fragment. So anything shot with copper, unfortunately, hit by cars away. We do get things as well. So, fresh car strike deer as well. So, yeah, we do resource wild meat like that when we can. But unfortunately, a lot of it is frozen thawed rats, mice, quail, which that's a part of the job that, not everybody loves. But those whole prey items are actually really, really important to a lot of our sort of animals that we rehabilitate here because they need the nutrition all the way through it. They need the organs, they need the muscle, they need the bone, and all that kind of stuff. So if we're only feeding portions of the body, unfortunately, oftentimes you may see deficiencies and stuff like that. And then, of course, just to prevent any sort of deficiencies of happening, we have a large array of vitamin and mineral supplements that we can resource as well. So, but a lot of it, unfortunately, is that bought food as well.
You mentioned porcupines earlier as well.
Yes.
Or she mentioned that it's one of your favorites. Do you rehabilitate porcupines as well, or
We
that
do.
must be very tricky?
Yes, it is. They don't like to be hugged very much. Uh, I love rehabilitating. I think they're an underappreciated species. They have those quills and things like that. So, anesthesia is a tool that we do use for them. It's easier to examine them when they're sleeping. Um, So yeah, we do. Unfortunately, a lot of them come in hit by car because porcupines could be a lot of things, but they are not fast. So when they hit the roadways and stuff, their main defense is to stop and flip up those quills. So unfortunately, when it comes to a car, that is not a very great defense to have. So unfortunately, that is where a lot of them come in. So yeah, we do rehabilitate them there. They're one of my favorites. I always say they sound the same as they do as babies and adults, so just a little lower, and they're like, it's like the cutest thing ever. So I do like them. They're actually quite a docile species. Once they realize I'm not there to hurt them, I often can work around them. Give them usually their favorite snacks. So they tend to be particular to a sweet potato. They're also a lover of salt, which is another reason why they tend to conflict with people. You hear them chewing on people's cabins a lot. Well, a lot of times the lacquer in your wood, in the treated wood, can have different types of salt in it. So they're salt lovers. So once they taste that salt, that's what they're after. So that, unfortunately, is what is attracting them to people's house. But yeah, I do love rehabilitating them as a whole lot. But a lot of times it's trauma they're coming in with. Luckily, I'd say we have a pretty good success rate with them, though. So.
You mentioned lead poisoning. How big of a deal is lead poisoning in rehabilitation these days?
It's pretty big. It's definitely an elephant in the room, unfortunately. With lead poisoning, obviously the most common patients we think of, coming down with it are your swans, your loons, and your eagles. And those are some of the big contenders for sure. Your eagles are getting it by, unfortunately, a lot of the gut piles left out in the woods during deer season. Unfortunately, if they're shot with lead bullets, they almost always have lead fragments in those in the gut piles, and they're eating that. And you would think it would take a whole bullet to kill them, but actually, it's just a flake of lead is enough to, unfortunately, be lethal for them. We actually, over Christmas break, we had an eagle we unfortunately lost due to lead poisoning. We have an ability to test in-house, but unfortunately her lead levels were far too high for the machine to read. So unfortunately she was a pretty hard case. So we're definitely, it's lead season for eagles because we're post-deer season. A lot of facilities throughout Wisconsin are getting a lot of eagles in there. Obviously the best thing you can do is choose a non-lead type of alternative to your ammunition. Copper is a really great type of an option to use. It's very known to be very accurate. It may take just a little bit of resetting your gun with it and a little bit of practice, but it's a very great option, and the eagles would appreciate it. Where your loons and your swans are getting it, though, is actually out of your fishing tackle. Oftentimes those lead sinkers that are coming off your fishing line, or once you've cut it and it drops to the bottom of the lake, swans and loons need small rocks inside their gizzards to go ahead and grind up their food and digest. Well, guess what size rock they need? The same size as those lead sinkers. So for them, it looks like a rock, and it must be a rock, so they eat it, and unfortunately, that is what they're getting their lead from. So again, whenever you're fishing, if you could choose a non-lead type of tackle, that is always the great thing for it, and clean up after yourselves whenever you can, because not only do they eat the sink lead, but they also get tangled in the fishing line as well. That's a very, very common thing we get calls about loons. It's wrapped around their face. They can swim and they can get away, but they can't eat. Or it's physically wrapped around their body and they cannot move, causing damage or injury that way as well. So yeah, anytime you can clean up after yourself, not leaving it how you found it, and yeah, any sort of non-lead sort of ammunition and sinkers would be really great. And we think about these iconic species like the loon, the swan, the eagle, but your geese are also getting it as well. A lot of them have lead in them. They're even starting to test, there's some larger rehabilitation centers that are starting to do some research about what has lead in it. Possums have a lot of lead in them. Raccoons are coming in with lead poisoning, but it wasn't seen at first because it had symptoms of other types of diseases as well, like distemper and stuff. So that's what people were thinking it was, and it's a big surprise, it's lead. There's even songbirds that have tested positive for lead. So it is so, it's getting out there in the environment now. It's not just out of direct consumption. Where is this lead sitting at? Where would a robin get lead poisoning from? Those kind of questions that we're dealing with now. So anytime we can not add to the issue is always great. And cleaning up after ourselves. It's definitely an elephant in the room, unfortunately, but it's something that by changing our behavior we can do something about. So.
I have a loon and an eagle question.
Yeah.
Last spring, 2023, the loons came back, and then I think we got this really bad icing, and I heard some of them, their wings froze or they died. Did you get any into the center?
We did not get any here. I think we were above the line where the storm was.
Okay.
So we did not directly in our area. We had very few. A lot of it was in the Wausau and down area where they were seeing them.
But some did die from freezing. Is that true?
Yeah. What happens is they're flying up up in the cloud level, and I always call them marathon flyers because they oftentimes fly from the Gulf and they're not stopping. They're coming through and they're flying like a tank. They're very heavy birds, and you're seeing them. I'm sure you have all seen them flying. They're pumping when they're flying. It takes a lot of muscle. So as they're flying through, they're flying at the level at which the water is freezing up there, and then it falls, and we're getting rain, but up there it's colder up there, so it's frozen up there. So they're icing up when they're up, and they're not thawing out. So when they're up there and they're icing, they're getting heavy. Their mobility has changed, and they gotta land. And oftentimes on the ground, what is happening is it's raining, so our roadways will be black and shiny. And if you're ever in the air and you look down at a river, that's the way it looks. So oftentimes they're coming down on those roadways, and they're not hitting the lakes very lightly when they're landing. So that's how they're hitting those roadways, unfortunately, and it can cause a lot of injury to them. It can fracture their keel bone, which is like their big breastbone, where all their flight muscles attach to, and things like that. They can cause internal damage. They can cause a lot of damage to the face, and oftentimes they're skidding down the road, a lot of external damage as well, damaging flight feathers. So yeah, unfortunately, those icing events aren't great. But we weren't seeing a lot up in this direct area because the storm or the weather pattern wasn't exactly where we are at. So.
Okay. And the eagle question. When we're out boating, once in a while you'll see an eagle on a log right at the water level. And I heard that if their wings get wet from trying to grab a fish, they have to sit there till they dry because they can't fly. Is that true?
That is true.
Yeah.
And eagles are actually really proficient at swimming. They'll actually just be pedaling along in the lake. They look very calm because they can actually swim. They're not speedy, but they can do it. So yeah, unfortunately, sometimes they lose the battle with that big fish, which they end up going into the water. And being fish hunters, they can fly quite well. Eagles, are not great at flying when they're wet. They're already such big birds, so when you take those feathers and you get them wet, they're not going to expand correctly, and water weighs weight too, so it makes them even heavier. So then oftentimes when you're seeing them run around lakes, we always suggest people just to monitor them for a couple hours. Oftentimes they'll fly off. So.
I've got an online question here. Do you ever work with the Raptor Education Group in Anigo?
We have done some work transferring birds down there. There's a few we don't have a license for, so we'll make sure we transfer them down there for care. There's certain species sometimes, like this year we got a young turkey in. We did not have we were unable to reunite him with his family because he was cat caught, and by the time he was ready to go, his family could not be found. So they had young turkeys that age. So it's always best when those little guys can be raised with their own. So we did transfer them down there and things like that. So we have done some work with them in the past.
Have you done any work with wild instincts?
We've done again a lot of it's with the transfer and stuff like that, where we're trying to talk back and forth. We do try to keep in touch about who's full on what and stuff like that. So try not to transfer them calls. Because there's certain calls like raccoons. We get many calls about them every year. Fawns, you're going to get a lot of calls about fawns, and trying to get them to the right centers and stuff like that. So yeah, we've done a little bit of work.
Yes, we had a fox that hung around our house, and we contacted the wildlife center, and with the symptoms we saw and it apparently had mange.
Yes.
Is that a common problem, and how do you deal with that? We were given a trap to use, but unfortunately we only caught 2 raccoons.
And the question was it 2 raccoons or the same raccoon? So, yeah, so mange, unfortunately, that's it's actually a mite is what that is. So it's actually like a parasite that burrows into the skin and causes, with that hair loss and that oily, stinky skin is actually like secondary infections. And they're actually getting an allergic reaction to from the mite itself, the off-put of the mite. So they're having that allergic reaction to it. It is treatable. The trick is oftentimes these animals are mobile, and catching them is the trick. If we can catch them in any sort of way, then yes, we can treat that. A lot of times with just topical treatment of it, and then some oral things that treat things like heartworm actually really works well for it. So we go ahead and we treat them with that. But again, the trick is to catch them. So that's the hard thing, is that live trapping, unfortunately, in that scenario is the best option. We find that oftentimes mange foxes are on the move, which also isn't always great. This year was an influx year. We had a very high mange year in the area. It tends to go in waves, where it'll be here or kind of won't.
We weren't able to catch this one, and then finally we didn't see it anymore. Does that mean it probably didn't survive?
It could be, but majority of the summer we kept getting calls about mange foxes, and we'd have people try to trap them, and usually when one person stopped seeing it, we usually got a call somewhere else in town. We do have suspicions that this fox did not stay put. We had one that we believe was around the entire Woodruff area. It frequently moved around. Another one in Minocqua. Unfortunately, we weren't able to catch either of those foxes. So we pretty much had tried with multiple people, whether trying to, and often they wouldn't stay put long enough is what we were concerned about. So and they were definitely far too mobile for us to catch them by hand, unfortunately. So unfortunately, when it gets colder like this, what does happen with them is they tend to pass away, not being able to thermoregulate right. So we're hoping that next year, now that this year cycle has gone by, that we won't be seeing it such significantly next year is usually the trend we're seeing. So hopefully we're not seeing it. I do have concerns that unfortunately we're not getting much of a winter. That's like one of the main advantages we have in northern Wisconsin, is that deep freeze we have in the winter. It tends to help kind of keep that bad disease off. We're not seeing it. I will say I'm seeing a little bit more of it the more we're getting more warmer winters, that some of that stuff can persist. So hopefully, as much as I don't want to say it, hope we get a little bit of deep freezing occurring here soon for that issue.
Amanda, once upon a time I saw a video of you trying to release a skunk.
Yes.
I think it had a bucket on its head or something like that.
Yes.
2 things. How did you draw the short straw on that one?
I was the only one working that day in the rehab department.
Yeah. And did you have to throw any clothes away after you got done releasing the skunk?
No, because when we arrived, it stunk. He had already fired. And the nice thing is that a skunk can only fire so many times in a day. So they only got like 1, maybe 2, depending on what's in the reserve tank. So yeah, it had already fired off, probably bumped into a tree, didn't know what it was, turned around and sprayed the tree. So I'd rather be at the tree than me. So luckily, yeah, I had a kind of a tongs that I was able to grab a hold of that can after a while. I pulled that sucker off. So I kind of started walking away from the skunk because he kind of stood there. And somebody that was actually there taking the video suddenly yelled, after she had turned the phone off, she was like, "Run!" And I turned around and the skunk was actually running straight for me. So I did as I was told and I ran. But the skunk was outrunning me a little bit. So I would have had it all of a sudden you could tell it got close enough where it put its brakes on and stared at me and turned around and whipped and went the other way. I think he had that syndrome where you're in a dark room and you quick turn on the lights and you can't see anything. And then once he realized what he was doing, he turned around and ran the other way. So all was good. So he did give me a little scare, but he was okay though.
So, what are some things that somebody who might not be as well versed in wildlife rehab or anything like that look for before they decide to make a call about an animal to the center?
Yeah, a lot of the times one of the main things we get a lot of calls about every year is white-tailed deer fawns. A lot of people would see what looks like a scrawny, skinny, nothing but skin and bones, tiny little baby deer curled up in the yard, and they walk up to it, and it's not moving. It's just stayed there. So they tried to pick it up, and it just falls down. It cannot stand. But believe it or not, that fawn is just fine most of the time. Mother deer will not be present because they can leave up their babies, and the baby will be just fine for up to 12 hours. That is actually really common. They have that. They don't want to. The fawn doesn't have much scent, so they don't want to spend much time around it, rubbing scent on it, so that predators could find it. They also have that camouflage that can actually be really easy, hard to find them in some scenarios and stuff like that. Unfortunately, does for some reason do like to leave them in the short grass in people's backyard, so that's not a great place to camouflage. But I always say it's a compliment that they're leaving your fawn there for you to babysit for the day while they go and they feed for the day. But it's actually a natural instinct that when they think they're in danger, they just drop. So it's this instinct that's taking over at that point that they're like, they can't fight you, so they're going to go to their defenses, and it's, if I stay still and I don't move, you don't see me. So it doesn't matter that you picked them up, they'll still like curl back up, like, oh, she didn't see me, and curl up like that. So that's one thing I always say is, definitely if you're worried about a fawn, and when they're born, they're nothing but skin and bones is what it feels like. And it's because they have underdeveloped muscle. That's all what it is. They're just curled up, hanging out, waiting for mom, and they're like, we're talking pounds. They can be really, really tiny, especially when there's twins. There's even less space. So, always suggest, unfortunately, a scenario we come into is people have worried about this. They bring them into their house, and they looks hungry, so they fed it some cow's milk out of their fridge, and then they call me. Unfortunately, that cow's milk is actually one of the worst things you can feed them. It's processed, and it also has casein in it, which is a type of protein in there, and the only thing that can actually digest that is a cow, not even people. That's why you have a lot of people that are lactose intolerant. So are deer. So they unfortunately can't digest that. So we're at a battle at that point to flush that out of their systems instead of being able to return them to mom. So I always say, if you don't know, please call me first before picking up the animal. So that's always one thing. Majority of fawn calls we get, I'd say we get over 50 every year, and just in the spring season, and I admit 10. So a lot of them are okay. So that's a big thing, that one of them that always sticks in my mind.
We keep a phone log, and about half of the calls that we get are just answering questions for people.
Yes.
In the springtime, or summertime, you uncover a nest of baby whatever, the first thing to do is cover them up and go, oops, sorry, and then give a call. I was raking in the yard this summer, and I uncovered a vole's nest, just a little furry dude, and there were little babies in there. I'm like, oh man, what did I just do? I covered them up, and I just kind of waited, and I could see the mom going through the grass. She picked one up and took it somewhere else. A lot of times the animals will have a backup plan too for their babies. Birds are a little bit different, they can't carry them away, but with mammals they usually can. So definitely just kind of cover them up a little bit and then give a call.
Yep.
I had a question, if I might.
Go ahead.
Working every day with a lot of the mammals that you get in the Wildlife Center, fox, skunks, things like that, do you maintain your vaccinations for rabies?
I do have my rabies vaccination. It's always a good backup card to have, just in case something, we're always taking safety precautions so bites don't happen, but accidents occasionally occur. So yeah, we're as a staff, we're rabies vaccinated.
Because I would think you'd have some risk there. I don't know how prevalent rabies is in the area right now, but there's some risk there.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's one of those diseases that's never truly gone. We're lucky it's been pretty low. I've also been really lucky. I've never actually admitted a case. I've had cases where I was suspicious and we tested for it and it was not. Or instances where, people unfortunately were bit by the animal, so that I'm legally obligated to have that animal tested in those scenarios, just in case, because you never know. So I've been lucky. I've never actually come across a case. So it's pretty low, but that doesn't mean that's a guarantee, though.
I have another online question. What are some of the volunteer opportunities that you have at the center?
Oh, yes. A lot. One of them is we're always looking for volunteer drivers, because especially in the heat of the summer, We can admit anywhere from 300 to 500 animals every year, which means that as a staff, we're very busy there taking care of them. There's oftentimes over 100 animals actively in care, and that's just in the rehab, because we always have residents as well that live there all year round that we're having to provide care for. So oftentimes I always say the first step of rehab is actually the rescue or the transport, because I can't help it unless it comes into the center. So that's always the first part of rehab, and we're always looking for people that are willing to drive anywhere from locally here all the way up to Ashland or all the way down to Wausau. It's kind of our region where we're admitting a lot from, because we're the only rehab between here and Ashland. So it's a pretty big area where there's nobody there to help the wildlife. So if anybody's ever willing to drive or go pick up an animal or is even interested in rescuing themselves, an animal that somebody has seen in their yard and something doesn't have the ability to capture it themselves or doesn't feel comfortable doing so, we're always looking for more people to do that. We do have a resident feeding program that occasionally we do have openings for, that we go ahead and we feed our normal residents. It can be a messy job because unfortunately these are like Tommy, who doesn't eat steak. She's eating those mice and those rats, so you have to be comfortable feeding those, but you're also feeding our turtles and things like that as well. Those are the kind of animals you can actually make a relationship with, though, because we don't snuggle our patients. And of course, we're always looking for things like helping with the maintenance around. We're in the process of building a new quarantine building, which is really exciting. But we're always looking for people to help with stuff like that. We even have things like flower gardens. We're always looking for front desk volunteers too, because that phone does ring on and off all day long with people that have questions that we're willing to answer and things like that. So we're always looking for people to that are willing to train in and answer those questions for us at the front door, meeting people at the front door that may be bringing an animal that didn't call, stuff like that. We take volunteers at the front desk as well.
And in the summertime, we do tours of our facility too. So we've had volunteers who have done those tours. We're always looking for people to help with fundraisers. And the form to fill out for a volunteer application is on our website.
This is a question for both of you guys. What is something memorable or exciting that you have experienced in the last couple years that makes you really excited to be a part of this field, either wildlife education or wildlife rehabilitation?
Well, I have a funny story. So when I do programs, I always like to give people ways that they can help wildlife. And when I do programs on turtles, I talk about if you see a turtle on the side of the road and you're worried about it, what you can do. I always tell kids, first thing to remember is that your life is more precious than some stupid turtle, so you want to be safe. I honestly heard about a guy who was trying to help a turtle cross the road, and he got hit by a truck. Thankfully, he was fine, but oh my gosh, right? But if you see a turtle on the side of the road, notice which direction it's facing and take it across the road. Sometimes people are like, what are you doing? And they want to turn it around. The turtle has a plan, so just take it across the road. Some people have told me they've picked the turtle up and brought it home, let it go on their lake. That's a nice thought, but they have a place where they want to live, so just, again, help them across the road. Well, my funny story with that was I was in the car with my wife and my daughter. We were driving down the road, and my daughter, she's been part of me working at the Wildlife Center since she was born, right? And she saw this snapping turtle on the side of the road, and she wanted to help it. Well, she was driving, and my wife was in the passenger side, and she decided to get out of the car to help the turtle. I'm in the way back, couldn't do anything, and I'm like, what is she going to do? Because she's never touched a turtle in her whole life. It was a snapping turtle about this big. Well, my wife got up behind the turtle, and she yelled at it. I should tell you, my wife was a high school math teacher, so she used her teacher voice. Amanda said turtles are slow. This turtle, literally, it was like, trying to get away from her. So generally, I tell people, pick the turtle up. If it's a painted turtle, between its legs, aim it away from you because it will pee on you, and just take it across the road. If it's a snapping turtle, I've talked to people that have gotten them to bite a stick. Some people carry around a big scoop shovel to lift it up. Put a sheet in front of it, drag it across the road. The only thing you don't want to do is pick it up by its tail, right? Because it's part of its backbone. I have a feeling if the snapping turtle had a choice and it could either die or get picked up by its tail, it would say, go ahead, I don't care, right? But that's like a last resort. But yeah, so anyhow, that story's my favorite thing.
Yeah, this summer, we've tried to rehabilitate a handful of osprey, and osprey coming in captivity are really, really hard to rehabilitate as a species. I always say they really are inactive participants in their own care. You try to get them to eat, they won't eat. You try to get them to perch on a perch, they won't perch. They just like literally stand there. And really, they're just truly not meant to be in captivity. There's a reason why you do not see them in zoos or anything like that, or at educational programs. They're just truly not built for it, and their minds are not built for it. So if they have a roof over their head, they're like, oh, I'm trapped. I'm done. So they'll just stand there. So we got this osprey in, and for some miracle, he decided he was going to eat fish. So he participated. We were getting him to eat without having to force him and push him through. He ended up coming in initially because he was attacked by an eagle, which is a common thing. Is an eagle, they are opportunistic eaters, and if the osprey caught a big juicy fish that looks delicious, he's going to try to eat it too. So unfortunately, the osprey was taloned in the back, and there's a lot of damage up along the spine. That thankfully was not permanent at all. There was no infection. We actually got him pretty quick afterwards, but we were able to, within a couple weeks, release that osprey back. And in my time here, that was our first osprey we've been able to release. So another fun thing, it was a male, a little guy. They're kind of awkwardly shaped because they have those giant wings and this little body. But he'd sit there all awkward. But he was ready to go. He would actually fly in our flight building for us to test his flight. Again, it has a roof over its head, so the osprey stands at this giant building and says, oh, I can't fly because there's a roof over my head. Luckily he did participate. We were able to test the flight. Otherwise, sometimes you just have to release him and hope for the best sometimes, and we did not have to go for that. Or you have to do something called Koreans flying, which means you put on a really long rope outside and let him go, and then you would catch them before they flew away. So to make sure if they weren't flying well, you weren't just releasing a bird that couldn't fly. But we were able to not only release him down about most of the way down County Road J towards St. Germain, but we actually found his nest and he went home. He had a mama was still up there with the babies, so that was really cool. Got to reunite him with the family. So.
Much. Thank you so much to Amanda and Bart. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you who participated tonight, and to all of our sponsors, Lakeland Chapter of the UW Alumni Association, Rocky Reef Brewing, Monaco Public Library, UW Kemp Natural Resources Station, UW Trout Lake Station, WXPR Radio, and the Brittingham Fund. And in the beginning of this, I said our next event is in March because I was wrong. So it's in February, our first Thursday in February. We'll be back here for that, for the Mississippi River Watershed. And again, don't forget about our special event next Thursday at the Monaco Public Library, where Mary Burns will talk about her woven tapestries. If you'd like to sign up for email reminders, we have a list back here. Northwoods Wildlife Center has a list back there too. You can sign up for their emails. You can also click on Contact Us on our website, scienceontapmonaco.org. See you next month.